All right, section 13.4, we're going to finish up today. We're taking a look at the rest of costs and advantages of home ownership. And we had taken a look at some terminology of what we meant last time. We had this wonderful formula for the regular monthly payment, right? One that we need to be really careful when we're using so that we don't lose decimals and things like that. And then we had taken a look at Ann and Andy's situation for purchasing their home. A couple of months of their amortization schedule, however many months this is, they would receive at closing, all listed out in a big giant list, like a table or a spreadsheet. And then we had talked about the fact that that's not the only thing that you pay for when you purchase a home. You also have things like taxes and insurance guaranteed, and then this questionable maintenance issue aside too. So we're taking a look now at example number 2. So there are financial advisors who would recommend that you never pay off a home early. And the reason is because you would lose a tax write-off. So this is definitely not something that you've encountered, but your parents might have encountered some of this before. So when you file your taxes at the end of the year, if you have enough things to itemize your taxes, so itemized giving is things like giving to a charitable contribution, so all the things that you give toward your church, toward other kids' missions trips, things like that. So things that you funnel through OBU that goes to a mission trip, right? Like they send it to OBU. Maybe some of you are going on Go trips this summer. It's charitable giving. Anything that you give to a local food pantry or shelter or things like that are charitable giving. All of that's tax deductible. But the interest on your home is also tax deductible. Okay, so this is what this is talking about. So if you lose the interest on your home, right, how much you pay on your interest on your home, then you would pay more money in taxes. And that's a true statement. Like you would pay more money in taxes. But we're going to consider if the idea of don't pay off your home early is actually good tax advice in the context of Ann and Andy's situation. So Ann and Andy's loan was $100,000, right? And their percentage was 3.5% for the interest. And so we're going to take a look just as a general kind of statement about whether or not this makes sense. So if we were looking at just the first year, we're going to figure out how much interest they would pay. And this is an approximate, right? Because what we found out over here with amortization is that each month they pay a little bit less interest than the month before, right? So we're going to assume that they're doing it for the entire year at the same amount of interest, which is a little bit off, but it's still enough to take a look at the argument, and it holds true for all the other details. So approximately, how much would they pay in interest? So the way that we have done interest each time, let's change our color, is that we have taken this formula, I equal PRT, right, for simple interest. Now, this isn't quite perfect, like I said, but it's enough for us to work with. The principal is $100,000. Our interest rate is 0.0375. And the time, if we're doing it for the first year, would be time equal to 1, right? Everybody good so far? Okay, somebody grab a calculator. Let's figure out approximately how much interest they pay on their home the first year and recognize that this is the high end. It's really going to be slightly smaller than this. What'd you get? Good, $3,750 in interest. Okay, everybody good? Okay. So let's take a look at the next part then. So we're assuming a certain tax bracket for Ann and Andy as well, based kind of loosely on where maybe their income would be with that house cost, that kind of thing. So again, your tax bracket changes. It changes based on your income. So if you are at a higher income level, you're in a higher tax bracket. So I haven't researched this in quite some time, but at least at one point in time, if you're in the highest tax bracket, like you make over, I'm totally making up numbers here, so bear with me. So let's pretend you make over $150,000 a year, which we would all say sounds good, right? The problem is that there's a threshold beyond which it's not good for you in terms of your taxes because you cross the path into the higher tax bracket. And so you may be paying 40% of your income in taxes. And that's not a made-up number. Those numbers are really, really high for high tax brackets. You have a lot more to pull from. But if you've made $149,000, maybe you're not in the 40% tax bracket. Maybe you're in the 30% tax bracket. So you actually take home more money, making slightly less. It's a really weird thing. So there are these tax bracketing kind of things that happen. So we're assuming a 25% tax bracket for the purposes of our argument. And so if you paid $3,750 on your interest, what would happen is that you would get a deduction of 25% on your taxes for that. So the amount that it would save us, so this is the $3,750 that they owed in interest, would be a deduction in our taxes, because it's a 25% tax bracket of 25%. So what is 25% of our $3,750? $937.50. Okay, so that first year of their house loan, I mean, they're not paying it off right away anyway. Of course, they're going to take that $937.50 off their taxes. That's a great deal, right? But as they continue on, here's what's actually happening. So Ann and Andy are paying the credit union or the bank $3,750 to keep from sending the government, $937.50. Now, if they have to pay the credit union that much money because they have to keep the house loan, then that's not a bad thing, right? You might as well take the advantage of the discount on your taxes. But it would not make any sense to send the credit union $3,000 some odd dollars to get $1,000 off on your taxes, right? Doesn't make sense. So this isn't good tax advice. If you want to actually send somebody money and get a tax break, send it to your church. Send it to a mission organization that you know is going to be like frugal and good with your money. But it doesn't make sense to send it to the bank to avoid sending it to the government. Now, if you have to pay the money to the bank because you can't pay off the loan, that's great. This is a good deal for you. But just as a general, don't pay it off when you have the money. This doesn't make sense. I mentioned escrow last time, so let's talk more about escrow, and then we'll be finishing up with some details. An escrow account is a reserve account maintained by the mortgage lender, so like the bank. It includes the taxes and the insurance. They're collected up front. We talked about this last time. From the borrower, and then they're paid by the lender to the respective agencies. So if you had, we're going to go back to an example that we did before. Was it this one? It was this one. Okay. So Ann and Andy's annual taxes were $932. Their annual insurance is $660. What that means is that at closing of the beginning, of the loan, they have to bring those amounts of money, $932, $660, and they have to pay it to the bank at the beginning of the loan. And then over the course of the next year, whenever it comes due, the bank gives it on to, Allstate and the state of Oklahoma or whatever. That's how that would work. But through the course of that year, 1/12 of those amounts, which is 1/12 these pieces right here, are being added to your mortgage payment every month so that it's always replenishing what they've just sent out. So there's always this extra amount being collected so that when it comes due, the bank can actually pay it for you. So you're kind of paying the the insurance and the taxes in advance when you do escrow. Sometimes you have a choice to do escrow and sometimes you don't. A lot of times new home buyers, or if your amount of money is a certain percentage, you're required to do escrow. You don't get to make a choice on that. It's just what it is. And it may not be a bad thing for you. If you feel like it would be difficult to budget and remember that you need to save, like this amount of money every single month so that when it comes due, you can pay it, then escrow is a good thing. But if you have the discipline and feel like you can handle and really can handle saving the money, setting that money aside, then you're going to save a little bit of money if you can do it yourself because you're not paying somebody else to do it for you, and just keep that extra, $1,500 or so dollars, almost $1,600 in money and sitting it there, just sitting there. So escrow usually isn't a choice, but sometimes it is. The houses that we've had before this one, escrow is not a choice. But the house that we're in right now, we had a choice. We don't escrow right now, but I've escrowed the 3 houses before that. So we manage that, and on our end, we can handle that, and it's okay. But I'll tell you what it does is it makes it really hard to write that check for your insurance. Not a check because it sends it electronically, but it makes it really hard to make that payment once a year because you see that money just wiped out of your account every single time. It's kind of interesting. So people make that argument about our health insurance costs as well. If you had to actually pay your health insurance costs out of your own check every single time and it wasn't just sort of taken off the top, you'd be a little bit more upset about the fact that it's costing you as much as it was. If you had to pay those taxes at the end or somewhere along the way out of your own money instead of them just swiping it off the top, you'd be a little bit more upset about it than you are. And so it's kind of this catch-22, right? There's good in it and there's bad in it, but that's an escrow account. Okay, I want to run through a number of different descriptions of things, not because you're going to be tested on them. There's no testing questions, I don't have anything on this, but because you need to know what these are to have at least heard them so that at some point when you go to buy a house, and it'll probably happen for most of you in the next 10 to 12 years, that's a made-up number, but it probably will. You're probably going to be buying a house at some point, that when those phrases come up, you're kind of like, I remember hearing something about that, and you can actually go figure out what it was you heard and whether or not it's a good thing for you or not based on your current financial situation. So a few pieces. This is quantities, I passed it, adjustable rate mortgage, that's where I'm meant to be. An adjustable rate mortgage or a variable rate mortgage, I mentioned it last time. It's sort of the antithesis, right, the opposite of a fixed rate mortgage. So this is the other option. These do not have a fixed rate. Okay, so Ann and Andy's loan, it was 3.75% every single month for the entire time of their loan. Always going to be the same, never going to change. Predictable. An adjustable rate mortgage generally starts out at a lower rate, so it's very enticing. So they might have been offered something like 1% to start out. That sounds really good. But after a certain length of time, it might change. So it changes periodically, and there's some conditions that surround how quickly it can change, how much it can change, those kinds of things. So these are the things that govern, the quantities that govern ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. The adjustment period, the time between rate adjustments. So can they increase that rate every year? That would be 1 year. Does it take 3 years before the rate increases? It's an adjustable rate, so there's an adjustment period. How frequently can they make that adjustment? The index. This is the standard fluctuating average for the new adjusted rate. How much can it go up? And believe me, it's going up. It's not going down. How much can it go up when it goes up every 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years? Right? If it goes up 0.25%, you might be like, no big deal. But if it's able to go up 3 or 4%, that might be a very big deal for the course of your loan. Margin, the additional amount added to the index by the lender, typically a few percentage points. So this has to do with paying points at closing, if you've heard that phrase before. Sometimes you can buy the interest rate down by paying part of it at the very beginning, and then you get a lower interest rate over time. So that's called margin. The discount is the amount by which the initial rate may be less than the sum of the index and the margin. I think we have 2 more slides, maybe payment cap ends. Yeah, 2 more slides. The index rate cap is the limit on the interest rate increases. So that's the limit. So that's a little bit different than the index. The index is the fluctuating average. So on average, it's going to go up, say 1%. But the index rate cap is the most it can go up. So it may go up on average 1%, but the cap may be 2, right? So it doesn't have to go up the entire rate cap, but it could. Periodic cap is the limit on rate increases per adjustment period. So this is typically 1% per 6 months or 2% per year. If your rate's going up 2% per year, that is a lot. That's a lot. Your overall cap is the limit on the rate that it can increase on the life of the loan. So not only do you have these sort of rate increases, they can only go up so much over periods of time, there is a limit that it can go up for the life of the loan. So that limit for the life of the loan is definitely going to be more, like the total is going to be more than the overall, like a fixed rate would be. But it may not be as high as you think, so it still might be something to consider. And then your payment cap is the limit on how much your payment can increase over each adjustment period. So not only is there a percentage limit or cap, there's a payment cap, which might be of more interest to you as the consumer, right? Like, how much is my payment actually going up, right? Is this $50? Is this $500, right? Like, what is my actual bang to my buck, right? Like, what am I changing in my actual budget in order to make that happen? And then a couple more. Negative amortization. So I had a friend in Ohio that had this happening on a loan. They had taken out a loan and they were having negative amortization. So negative amortization means that the cost that they owed back to the bank was actually more over time than less. So they weren't even making enough to cover, they weren't even paying enough every month to cover the interest because the way that the loan was structured. That's not good, right? So that $100,000 that Ann and Andy borrowed, maybe 3 years from now they owe $120,000. That's bad, right? That's exactly the opposite of what you would want to have happen. But that's called negative amortization. Convertible creatures. How about convertible features? Convertible features are contractual ability to convert a fixed rate mortgage. So there are times in a variable rate mortgage where you're able, like depending on how it's structured, of course, you're able to convert it to a fixed rate mortgage. So you're able to say maybe it's 5 years in. We're making this up because we don't have the loan that we're looking at. At 5-year mark, you could say, I'm going to change this to a fixed rate mortgage. So why might that be of value to you? Well, you might say, okay, well, interest rates are really high right now. So if I do a variable rate mortgage, I can get 3% instead of 7%. But in 5 years, the likelihood is that things swing, right? Things swing financially in our culture. Things swing politically in our culture, right? If you have a full swing one direction, you're probably going to experience a full swing in the other one. So interest rates do this. So if the interest rates are really high, the expectation is at some point they're going to come back down. Well, maybe their belief is that in the next 5 years when that contractual agreement ends, it's going to come back down, so you're going to be able to change it to a fixed rate mortgage. But you always have the possibility that it's not going to come down when you need it to, right? It's going to actually stay high or be higher than you were before. And then the last one is the prepayment penalty. We mentioned this one last time. This isn't just a mortgage thing. This can happen on any of these ending loans, right, that we've been talking about. That there are sometimes prepayment penalties, which means that to pay it off early, you actually pay a penalty in doing that. That may or may not be a big deal, but it's something you should still be aware of. Right? If I pay this off early, do I incur a fee to do so? It's called a prepayment penalty. So most fixed rate mortgages, things like that, don't have this, but a variable rate mortgage may.